Okay, well, welcome into Scaling Bitcoin Together. Have some amazing guests scaling BTC beyond Bitcoin. Yeah, my name's Andy. I run a media company called The Rollup. About a month ago, we did a 3-week-long kind of interactive education series about Bitcoin. Haven't met these panelists, so good to meet you guys and excited for the first panel of the night. Let's start with some introductions and maybe your most favorite character in the Bitcoin history or crypto history book. And if you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer that. But I'll go first and say one of my most favorite, which is Andreas Antonopoulos.
Ooh, good pick.
Okay, my favorite's a Bitcoin Hack Guide, to make it funny at least. So I'm Alexei, I'm one of the co-founders of Bob. I've been working on Bitcoin research for quite a while now. It's been 9 years, come from academia, computer science background. And yeah, what are we doing with Bob? Bob is a hybrid, so we're not a Bitcoin layer 2, these don't exist yet. I'm sure we'll talk about that now. And our vision is to connect to both Bitcoin and Ethereum at the same time, leveraging security for both and having native access to the assets. And yeah, super excited to be here. We're actively working on BitVMP2 research, leveraging things like merge mining, so a lot of buzzwords that we can probably decipher.
Awesome. So hey everyone, my name is Alisia. I'm one of the founders of Botanix Labs, so I handle the business side of things. My background is I've been in crypto for about a decade, so started off in Bitcoin, then not much was happening for a while, so moved to Ethereum land, participated in the ICO era, built my own liquid fund, degen pretty hard, then found my way back into Bitcoin, met my co-founder who was a Bitcoin maxi, I was an ETH maxi, I'm now back correctly to being a Bitcoin maxi, and I would say that my favorite Bitcoin figure is Len Sassaman, who's my pick for Satoshi, hot take. And a bit about Botanix Labs, and I'm sure we'll get into all of this, but yeah, we're a Bitcoin L2 that is EVM. We're actually the first ones, I think. It was actually EVM equivalent. Went on testnet last year, prepping for mainnet, and happy to tell you guys more about our approach to scaling, I guess, throughout this conversation. Yeah.
Cool. I think I'll go next. So I'm Kerf, and I lead ecosystem at Particle Network. A little bit of a different project in terms of what they're building, but I can share a little bit more about that later. A bit of background, I think I've been with Particle for about the past 1.5 years now. Before that, I was doing analyst work at Poppy, if you know of them. They are quite HTX now, and then another EVM layer 1 previously as well. And then at Particle, essentially we are like an infrastructure tooling company. So we do things like social login, embedded wallets, account abstraction. At the moment, we are live on about 60 different chains, so across EVM, non-EVMs, and then most recently, the Bitcoin networks as well.
I'm loving this no microphone. It's very intimate. It's very quiet as well, which is a nice change up from the rest of the panels. To kind of kick us off, I'd like to lay the foundation for this Bitcoin scaling landscape with kind of the why. Before we start talking about the hows, which everybody has kind of their own thesis on, let's understand why it's important for for the Bitcoin base layer to go in this path. I like to call it modularization. I've got this hat on that says I'm just a modular guy. Big fan of the modular thesis, but why is it important that Bitcoin doesn't just remain this kind of ossified base layer and is going to scale out to bring more programmability via L2s, via rollups, and kind of expand its capabilities as an ecosystem? And feel free to jump in and then kind of, have a group con that doesn't have to come back to me.
Sure. I guess for the last decade, what we've seen is Bitcoin has also been ossifying, right? We've seen Bitcoin focusing more on adoption, mass adoption. It's penetrated every sector, from retail, governments, online merchants, cross-border payments. But people get into Bitcoin. 90% of crypto still arguably gets into Bitcoin first. However, once they've learned about wallets, the blockchain, they have to leave to either centralized exchanges if they want to do something more, or other networks. And for this reason, we've had for the last decade a drain of capital, brain, and talent away from the Bitcoin ecosystem. In fact, a lot of my former colleagues and friends went off to do Celestia, Avalanche, a lot of people from research that started with Bitcoin left. Even Ethereum was created because, Vitalik was digging into Bitcoin, right? And there is, of course, a problem. Why? Because I think there is a big chasm between adoption and innovation. And layer 2s have the potential to bridge that gap, of course. Now the question is, why should we even care? And I think the one thing, we're at an ETH conference, why are we even talking about Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin has something that no other digital asset has. It has the brand. And hear me out why this is relevant. Apple spent billions of dollars so that when you see the Apple logo, you know what this is. Bitcoin has this already. Bitcoin is our way to actually get adoption of digital assets Web3 beyond the 3 to 5% that we have now. Because if I go up to someone in Buenos Aires and tell them about Bitcoin, they probably have heard about it. If I start telling them about proof of stake and staking and eigenlayer and whatnot, no, that doesn't work. And for this reason, I think it's our mission, of course, to leverage Bitcoin not only for liquidity and but also actually for the brand and its power as being the most widely adopted digital asset. And then last but not least, mining profitability as at an all-time low. So if we don't fix that, if we don't find a way to get more users onto Bitcoin, to generate more revenue for the Bitcoin economic layer, well then we're going to run into major issues in 4 years. And if Bitcoin goes down, I don't think we'll be sitting here, celebrating layer 2s. We'll be talking about, well, what are we going to do with the rest of crypto?
Yeah, I fully agree with everything Alexei said, obviously because we're building for a similar thesis, right? But I think for me, it also comes down to two things, right? So if you think about Bitcoin, right, it's stood the test of time. The most permissionless, the most decentralized, the most secure. It is the best and hardest money, right? And if you think about money, it doesn't just exist as a store of value, right? We need for it to transcend from being a store of value to medium of exchange, to financial instrument, to full global money. And that is the potential that Bitcoin initially had that we need to keep remembering. And that's against the entire ossification the industry is moving towards. But I think for me, broader than that is actually fulfilling the promise and potential of Bitcoin in a global sense. So I live in the United States. I'm not American, I'm Canadian, but I live in the United States. And in the United States, you never have to worry about the USD technically failing because it is the global currency of reserve, right? I spent most of my career in emerging markets. So I spent about a decade bopping around like Asia, Africa, Latin America. And that's what got me into Bitcoin in the first place, because in a lot of these places, people were subject to their national and political economies, and their currencies failed. Like, I got into Bitcoin in 2015. The Brazilian real, which is where I was living at the time, depreciated 30% in a year, right? People actually had to go to Bitcoin because they had no faith in their country's currency anymore. Citrea, like Orkan from Citrea, like he's from Turkey. They're experiencing a similar crisis right now. So in a lot of these parts of the world, Bitcoin is the only answer. Yeah, they're not using Ethereum. For them, Ethereum is still far too speculative. It's not a hard enough asset class anymore. So for them, all they have is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin needs to transcend beyond just being a unit of value to actual programmable money that they can transact with, that they can build wealth with, and that is what we would like to help enable. So that's like the broader mission of what we're also working towards.
Yeah, I think fully aligned with like the previous two speakers as well. So I guess also a bit of background. So at Particle, essentially we collaborate with all different sorts of chains, so like EVM, non-EVM to like Bitcoin as well. So I spend a large chunk of like kind of my time here, like working with a lot of the EVM chains. But I think when we started to integrate some of the Bitcoin chains, started to learn a bit more about Bitcoin. And I think this is where like the store of value, and also I think the main point like the previous two speakers were talking about is like the sense of trust in the currency in itself. So I think trust in itself is something that is like hard to replicate, because essentially money, like when it first started, it was like people just kind of trade commodities, they trade like objects, and you require like a massive group of people to kind of trust that one thing as something that's valuable and they can use to exchange things, right? And I think that is something that Bitcoin has that the other I think Ethereum has its benefits as well, but it's something that I think makes Bitcoin very unique. So I think that's what draws me into Bitcoin.
Yeah, some really great points there on the why, which I think is probably aligned. But I think as we get into the how here, there might be a bit more of disagreements, or at least some contradicting thoughts, which it's time to jump right in. So let's first understand what the technical innovations are that have been happening at the Bitcoin scaling level. We have BitVM. There's also OpCat, OPCat. Let's have a quick briefer as to kind of what these are and what these innovations are enabling for the Bitcoin scaling space, starting with BitVM. And Alicia, if you want to take that, or
Actually,
you,
well,
Alexei.
he's the BitVM expert.
Alexi's our
I get to be
technical
the
guy
Bit-
today.
I get to be the BitVM guy.
There we go.
I'll be the
Um,
OpCat girl because it was written by our CTO. So
There we go.
So, BitVM. I mean, I think, look, what we all want to do, I think we all agree ZK is the future, right? The goal, why this whole BitVM versus OpCat debate evolved or emerged is we want to have ZK verifies on Bitcoin. Why? Because that's the most practical, long-term, sustainable way of actually enabling, well, rollups, layer 2s, real layer 2s that allow us to inherit security from Bitcoin. And most importantly, I do think for many Bitcoiners, that's what it boils down to, putting Bitcoin into the layer 2 and always being able to get it out. So custody. And there's two options. There's, like, think about it this way. Bitcoin script can actually do everything, right? Many people think that Bitcoin is not Turing complete and that's why we can't do smart contracts. It's actually not true. We can do universal computation with Bitcoin script. But imagine a program that's like 5 lines of Solidity, that's 1,000 lines of Bitcoin. Because script cannot do a lot of things, so you have to write every single operation yourself. What does that mean? If we want to do something more fancy, like, you know, a ZK verifier, that is currently 4 gigabytes of Bitcoin script across 16 verifier, 4 gigabytes. How do we get that into Bitcoin block? And that's where there's two options. There's OPCAT, where we introduce some additional pre-compiles. If you come from Ethereum world, it's like a pre-compile. You have some functions that you can call, reduces the size of the script that you need to put in the transaction, more efficient, less space. But that needs a fork. And then the other option is BitVM, which does not need a fork, which says, well, okay, let's break it down into chunks. And now we're talking about, you know, I won't go into too much detail. We can jump into that later. Or you know, if you want to talk about BitVM v2, I'll be around. But the idea is you do this optimistically. You break it down into chunks that can be executed in a block, so they fit 4 megabytes or maybe even less, 400 kilobytes. And then I, as an operator, will commit and say, this is what I'm running. And then you could challenge me and say, no, this is actually wrong. This is not what you promised to do. The result of this sub-program is different from what you committed to. Because that small piece of the whole program you could actually run in script. That's the idea. And it's basically the same what we have in arbitrum optimism, right, for operators. And the funny bit is it sounds so simple on Ethereum, but it is so annoyingly complex in Bitcoin because we don't have the tools.
So the core idea is, okay, we all have a shared trust in Bitcoin, L1. This is something that we can agree on just based on the consensus mechanism. But then to expand that trust to layers atop of it, or, you know, to decide however you kind of want to understand that, there has to be some sort of bridge, basically. There has to be some sort of way for user to go from Bitcoin to Rollup A, B, and C. And without a secure bridge, that execution environment is all just but a multi-sig or something that can be kind of exploited, or there could be problems. With the implementation of BitVM, you're saying that if we can get this right, then we can have that interoperability from L1 to these rollups using ZK, which will...
It's not ZK,
okay,
right? Because it's still optimistic.
Okay.
We would use a snark verifier because just it's more efficient. You compress the program. Otherwise, think about it this way: the cool thing about snarks is it's constant size, the verifier. So I can plug in any program for which I can generate a prover to have a 4 gigabytes verifying script. So that's kind of just the compression before. It's a step before. It's actually there for succinctness. We can verify snark proof on Bitcoin natively, right? That would maybe be possible with OpCat. Maybe. It will be very expensive still. So BitVM right now, and of course I'm a BitVM build. I represent this kind of BitVM camp more, I guess, than the OpCat camp. That's, in my opinion, the one that will likely be the one that goes to mainnet first and will work. And if that works, well, do we even need a fork? We'll see. But it's not a ZK. It's not a ZK rollup in that sense, as we know from Ethereum.
Understood. Alicia, would you...
yeah. So I'm not as technical as Alexei, but I will comment on, I guess, the commercial viability of both of these approaches. So familiar with BitVM and OpCat, neither of these are possible right now, hence why we're building the Spider chain, because it's the only L2 design which is actually possible on Bitcoin Core today. So actually our CTO wrote OpCat, and another one of our engineers wrote OpTX hatch, which is the other major opcode that's being considered. Having two of the best Bitcoin devs in the world on our team, I think what we can say is it is really, really hard to predict a Bitcoin soft fork. I think anyone who thinks that, you know, OpCat is happening in 6 months or 6 years, we really don't know. So it's really hard for us to opine. We stay politically neutral on the entire debate, just because that is the best, I think, the best positioning to take, especially when speaking to Bitcoiners, right? Because there are a lot of Bitcoiners who are pro-ossification, right? And I think with BitVM, again, a brilliant idea. We're also like our engineers are friends with Robin, who wrote that white paper, so we're accompanying that process very well. I think Robin will also say that anyone claiming to use BitVM is not using BitVM, and he has said that very publicly also. So I think we're very far away from any sort of actual, trustless bridge design for BitVM. Once it does come out, and hopefully it will, it's going to be brilliant, and it's going to impact all of our designs, right? And so, yeah, I think roughly aligned with Alexei, that BitVM seems more temporally likely in terms of just timing compared to OpCat, but yeah, we're in favor of both, I would say, in the long term.
Fun fact, OpCat was removed by Satoshi in 2010 in a miscellaneous updates push on GitHub.
Yes. Yeah, actually, so Armin, our CTO and my co-founder, he's writing OpCat right now with Ethan Heilman, who's the other author of OpCat, and he actually did a 2-hour class on the history of OpCat for our team. So, and it's really,
find that?
Yeah, actually, yeah,
Is it on
maybe
YouTube,
we will.
or?
Should record that.
Yeah, we should
It's,
record that. We
Bitcoin
should
history.
record that. And it's really, really interesting because it is a few lines of code. It's a few lines of very powerful code, and actually, elementally, it's basically concatenation. It's a concatenation function. But yeah, it is quite powerful. And I think it's interesting because even Armin and Ethan, who are the authors of OpCats, will say that we need to be careful in terms of how we implement it. So, which is why I think we are quite a ways away from it being implemented.
Cool. Okay, so that's kind of this divergent path that we're looking at now, and looking at the broader landscape of where we are now with the Bitcoin scaling environment. How do you guys approach building in this space when the future is almost like disjointed in a sense, where like perhaps you might smirk at the question, but like typical builders in the space, it's hard to predict the future in crypto because it's in 2 years things are far different. But specifically in the Bitcoin space, you guys have these milestones where if BitVM goes online and works, the way in which you guys approach your design will change. Similarly with a soft fork, with OPCat. So how are you guys thinking about the way you're building this now and how you guys are approaching those different milestones?
Yeah, I can go first maybe here. So I think our approach has been to not wait for those folks, right? Because it's really hard to predict when that trustless bridge design of BitVM will come online. It's really hard to predict when OpCat is going to come online. So our approach is to build a design that is compatible with Bitcoin Core today. And I think that is what really differentiates us. So the Spider Chain, which is our approach to Bitcoin scaling, which is essentially a network of decentralized multisigs backed by Bitcoin proof of stake consensus mechanism, it is the only design, as I'm aware today, that can actually be done on Bitcoin Core. And that's what really differentiates us. That's why we are almost in production, and that's why we're going to mainnet soon.
But it's
right?
still like your own alternative consensus mechanism.
It is an alternative.
You have your own
consensus
set of
mechanism.
validators.
Yes. So
that are still trusted.
we're starting out with Federation and Proof of Authority with about 15 nodes. We're only running one of the 15 because we truly want to be decentralized from the get-go. But then we will implement slashing, move to a DynaFed, and about 2 years from now, we want to be fully permissionless. So we want everyone in the world to be able to spin up their own Spider Chain node. So we want to be more decentralized than Ethereum itself. And I think that is the one thing that unites our entire team. So I'm the only Ethereum person in my Bitcoiner team. It's been quite an experience. I don't have seed oils anymore and don't wear sunscreen. That's part of a Bitcoiner culture for you guys. It's like a whole thing. Also have to eat red meat and lift for at least 20 minutes a day, which has actually kind of been great. But anyway, that's Bitcoiner culture for you guys. But that's why for us with Spider Chain, we really were focusing on, decentralization. So we're decentralization maxis. We think about it not just from the whole multi-sig network level, but also from the node and infrastructure perspective. So that's been our approach. And then when and if OpCat happens, which Armin is, he's actually working on the mainnet version right now, we'd probably be able to do an optimistic version of the Spider Chain, right? To enable CK fraud proofs on top of the spider chain, which would enable greater cryptoeconomic security. And once BitVM comes out, similarly would be able to incorporate that bridge design into the spider chain and again enable further cryptoeconomic security. So basically in both of these scenarios, we could incorporate those and it would just make us faster.
I mean, so there's all the, I don't think there's like this, oh, what's going to happen, BitVM or OPCAT. I mean, first of all, if we had consensus today on OPCAT, it will take 6 months to go to mainnet. We'll have enough time, all of us, to figure out, okay, does it work, how do you plug it in? I think it's great, for example, like, it's going to take a while. It's Starknet announced this $1 million fund to really, break it or build on it, which is amazing. That's the way to go, in my opinion, really fund it. Let's try it out. Nobody's going to push it to mainnet right now. That's not going to happen. But it's the best way to actually put money behind it and validate that. With BitVM, at the end of the day, look, both of these designs will not be usable by users. That is something that many people miss. Anything that's more fancy than a multisig becomes very sophisticated to use for the user.
Yeah.
So users won't even notice. And that's like on our side, what we're working on is basically hiding that. So people will swap into any chain that uses BitVM or OPCAT. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. One of these two models will give us security. Ideally, long term, we'll get a ZK verifier in, right? BitVM is a hack, ultimately speaking, because Bitcoin does not have that functionality. Now, it doesn't really impact our roadmap, not really. Like, we're working on BitVM, we're releasing BitVM v2 as a technical spec soon, together with Robin and a few other researchers. That will highlight, it's a massive improvement, right? It actually leverages the ZK verifier for compression. It's a massive improvement over V1. I know there was lots of criticism of practicability. I think that really addresses that. And then finally we have a spec, which then hopefully everybody can look at and break it or contribute. And at the end of the day, I don't see that as two camps. We all want the same thing. And like for Bob, we're a bit different. Like we're a hybrid. Like we're not a Bitcoin layer 2. Like none of us is, factually speaking. Until BitVM or BCAT, none of us will be. We're an Ether 2 though. We have fraud proof since a few hours ago, technically making us the most secure Bitcoin layer 2 kind of on the market, which is kind of controversial. But for us, the goal is, okay, well, let people build now, leverage networks effects of Ethereum, let people actually deploy their contracts, start doing things with Bitcoin, and we build infra that allows you to easily bring in BTC into the network. So Bitcoin Intents will build a MetaMask Snap integration, so you can use Ordinals runes with MetaMask. So things that will be necessary no matter which bridge design actually succeeds. And at the end of the day, it's also about getting the Bitcoin liquidity unlocked. And unfortunately, for the whales and the miners and the big Bitcoin OGs, they're all institutionalized. They will not move their Bitcoin from their custodians. Like, we work with Threshold a lot, and we struggle to get the Bitcoin capital into that even. And that's been around for a while. So ultimately, it's going to be a long journey of unlocking that capital, moving away from custodians, and we'll have to find the step-by-step approach of educating people. But the good thing is, the Bitcoin OGs, the community, they've tasted blood. They can earn yield in the Bitcoin, they can do more. And I think we're at the very beginning of this kind of Bitcoin renaissance.
The ETF is like the great enabler of this institutional capital from outside of crypto coming in, but also simultaneously has turned into the enemy of that can suck up so much capital and become a place where that's not being put on chain, which is just centralizing more of the supply. So it's kind of it's an interesting paradox there. Kerf, I'd like to get you involved in this. We're talking here about 2 new blockchains. I've heard that there's hundreds of L2s now. Apparently in the APAC region, I haven't been, so I don't know. But you guys are focused on this abstraction idea. How are you looking at this landscape of users from let's say different ecosystems, Cosmos, Ethereum, and also just non-crypto users coming in and operating on these chains and kind of creating a seamless user experience for interoperability as well as just on these chains as a whole?
Yeah, I think just now Alexei made a good point about how even if on technical level things changes and stuff, for the users they don't care, right? They just want to use a product that works. They just want to make sure that whatever transaction I send is sent to the wallet address that I am going to. So particularly I think essentially what we are launching soon is this product called Universal Account or Chain Abstraction essentially, where with one wallet interface, the users they don't need to know which chain they're on, so they can, let's say if I wanted to send 10K on Botanix, I can aggregate all of my balances across Polygon, Arbitrum, Solana even, and then send it across to say Botanix or Bob. And then at the same time as well, they can use any sort of gas fee, any token to pay for gas use across any of these chains. So Yeah, I think working with many chains, we have seen the ups and downs of many chains. So at the start, about a year ago, probably it was like Polygon, Arbitrum, and then recently Bera, ZK Mona, and all of this. So in a sense, if you take a step back, it's all the same pool of users. They are jumping from chain to chain. Builders or developers, they are sort of like run farming as well. So yeah, I think essentially for Bitcoin, where it comes into place, like if people trust it as an asset, and there is a lot of people already holding Bitcoin from institutions to the wheels and stuff. It's just about showing them that you can use Bitcoin aside from just holding a store value. You can use it across DeFi, across all of these, and then so I think the trust is there, and over time I think just different factors like building up the community, showing that it works, and then the user pool will slowly start to trust it and build more things on it.
Yeah, I think like one of the big things is going to be accessing the network effects of these other ecosystems that have users and have liquidity. While I think there's a pretty strong possibility that the Bitcoin scaling solutions, if you guys get this right, like could easily be much more dominant in terms of capital size than any current ecosystem, just by the nature of the market cap of Bitcoin and the holders. But in the current state, a lot of that is on Ethereum and some of these other chains, and kind of using something like Particle and just other abstraction solutions to kind of give users a chance to come onto your network is something that I think in the early days you guys will be appreciative of, but perhaps later on may look back and be like, kind of, we're the big guys on the playground now. I want to kind of come back over to OPCat if you guys don't mind. This one might have a hot take here from Alexei. I'm a bit worried that OPCat might bring MEV onto the L1, where there's a limited amount of programmability now, and such that by bringing more, I think smart people out there can figure out how to cause some centralization risk for miners, bring MEV, miner extractable value on chain, so where in the validation of blocks, in the mining of blocks, there's ways of kind of MEV to be on chain. I think David from Alpin Labs gave us the example of possibility of there being an AMM on the L1 somehow. Again, I'm not sure exactly the details, but this would be a source of MEV. What's kind of the reality of the future of Bitcoin L1 MEV as a result of OPCat, and is it something that we should be seriously considering and talking about as a community?
Where's Eric when you need him, I guess?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, MEV might be an issue. But at the end of the day, right, I mean, the MEV is such a broadly defined term. And actually, there's a very good article or debate by Matt Corello, right, which he calls Meville or Meville. And yes, it could be an issue. But on the other hand, you can already have some form of MEV, right, already today. Because we have essentially bridges, we have Lightning. If I want to sense a transaction, it's a broad definition, right? People know MEV on Ethereum in terms of, okay, I'm reordering transactions, I'm front running you basically, right? You don't have that on Bitcoin, not yet. You might have that though if you have more functionality introduced. Of course, OPCat might open that kind of worms. We don't know for sure. It's really hard to speculate by what it could enable. Like look at Taproot. People didn't think that it will do ordinals. It enabled BitVM, it enabled ordinals. It might do other things. And any functionality, it's very hard to predict what can it do. You can prove that something is not possible, but you definitely cannot prove that, okay, I cannot do thing X yet. So within that limit, it's kind of hard to say whether we'll have MEV as an issue on Bitcoin. What we do know, and there's been lots of work about bribing attacks, which is kind of a subform of MEV. You could already bribe miners to not mine a Bitcoin transaction. You could bribe them on Ethereum or on a layer 2 using light clients. In fact, the game theory for that is to be proven that in theory, you could already do this today, that miners, if they're rational, would always take the bribe. Does it happen in practice? No, it doesn't. Will MEV happen in practice if we get, well, what will OPCat enable? I mean, realistically speaking, I don't think we'll have people building all AMMs into the L1. They could try, but realistically, you'll have to compete with and roll up on Ethereum for performance and transaction speed. Nobody's going to get that directly on the L1. So it'll be L2s, and then yes, you might have issues that people are trying to withdraw transactions and you do reordering, but at the end of the day, for that specific bridging component, I don't see it being an issue. And that's ultimately what we all care about, how to get Bitcoin out again.
Can I just say,
Of
I think
course.
MEV is a credible threat, I would say, but I do think that is why, as someone who kind of has a window into this entire OPCAT process, they're being very judicious about it, and that is why there's going to be such an extended testnet process, right? So I think that is, we have this window of time to experiment, to figure out what are the possibilities and what are the dangers potentially of OPCAT. So I mean, obviously I'm extremely biased, but I do think they're being very judicious about OPCAT to prevent MEV, because yeah, that is an existential threat for Bitcoin, as it is for Ethereum.
Yeah, it just leads to centralization. All right, I'll pull us out of the weeds. I mean, this is where the technical conversations should happen. The users don't care. I have a running thought that I've been battling with, and through this Bitcoin series that we did, which chill, if you want to learn more about some of the technicals of these projects, check out the Rollup on Twitter. We've got a YouTube series about it, technical presentations. And one thing that I kept asking, and I will keep asking, is, do Bitcoiners really want programmable use, yield? Do people really want to take their coins out of cold storage and do things with them and take a risk of smart contracts or of centralization or of multi-sigs or bridges to earn some sort of yield? And if so, like, what is that? What is an estimated threshold that you think is worth it? Or how do you think these people are thinking about taking their Bitcoin from their cold wallets and putting it to use from a risk to reward kind of perspective?
I mean, I think they've already been doing it with WBTC for so long, right? So I think WBTC, the reason that has product market fit, right, is because people wanted to do things with their Bitcoin. And so that's a proven market that's out there. Obviously, that is quite centralized, and I think people are looking for more decentralized ways of accessing DeFi and yield. But I think it's really interesting. Bitcoiners are very different from ETH folks. I could say that being both, right, a little bit. Bitcoiners don't want 20% yield, they want 2% yield. They think they're terrified of 20% yield. Bitcoiners also don't want points, right? So there's a lot of things that are very specific to like the Bitcoiner perspective. And I think that is, I mean, at least for us at Botanix Labs, that's the audience that we're going for, right? And it's really interesting. So 2 of our team members were on like Peter McCormack's What Bitcoin Did podcast. And really interesting, because that's obviously a crazy Bitcoiner maxi crowd, very pro-ossification, if that makes sense. And they loved our approach specifically because they were like, okay, cool, no changes to Bitcoin. You can do all of your degen shit on second layer, and you can withdraw it back to Bitcoin. And we're like, yeah, cool, we can do all of that, right? And I think once you position it that way, that opens up so many possibilities, you know. So Bitcoiners are not as averse to unlocking their Bitcoin as I think we were originally thinking. We just have to do it in a trust minimized and decentralized way.
I mean, I'll say I'll disagree a bit, otherwise it'd be boring.
Sure. Go for it.
I come from a Bitcoin maxi community. I used to go to the building on Bitcoin brick and Bitcoin events, and I would start get uninvited from the more like podcaster things, right? We have the podcast crowd, which is like, oh, ossification and Bitcoin as a religion thing, because I was talking about Bitcoin bridges. Like, let's bridge it over. You don't touch Bitcoin, and you bridge it over, and then they would still get upset. Now suddenly, at BitVM and like this whole kind of renaissance of the community as well, with new people coming in, where suddenly everybody's talking about layer 2s and bridges and so I think the community's been healing, and we've had this very toxic kind of culture of in Bitcoin, or everything else is bad, everything that's not coming from Bitcoin is bad, and like, go away. And that is a very small but very loud group of people. Now if you look at this room here, we're at ETH conference, like who has Bitcoin, like here in this room, who has BTC, right? And if you go to Bitcoin events, like some of the maxis, I remember this very clearly, like, oh, who has other coins in this room? And they were hoping like nobody raised their hand. It was like everybody. So like, we're all Bitcoiners, like at heart. We're all Ethereum users, like at this conference at heart. So at the end of the day, I really don't like this, oh, it's a Bitcoin user, it's an ETH user. I think there's users who like DeFi, who care about decentralization, and they will use it. And then what we should focus, they're easy to, if we give you an easy way to use a Bitcoin and we can show you that it is secure in a way that is practical, you'll probably say, okay, why not? You're using WBTC or RemBTC, maybe you use that. We're using Base that until recently had no fraud proofs, and we're fine with it. Now, then there is the crowd that's using centralized exchanges. That's the target. That's target number 1. Get them off the centralized exchange, improve UX, show them that it is more secure. Maybe it's not BitVM yet, it's not BCAT yet, but there's very secure ways to custody Bitcoin already today. It's multi-sigs, but you can do them in a trusted way. You can do them decentralized. You can use institutional custody, which is specialized in this. Let them do that first. And then like it's a step-by-step, baby-step process to just get people the feeling that they can use their BTC. And then I think there is definitely a small crowd of people that will never use that. That's fine, that's all right. But I think that that group of people is very, very small. And it's just been a cultural thing and a perception that Bitcoiners are so angry about everything else and they hit shitcoins. But where are they? I was at BTC Prague. I don't see any of the podcasters anymore. So I think the community is healing.
Yeah,
I also think Ordinals was like that big watershed moment last year,
sure.
right? The reason why we're all in this room right now is actually because of Ordinals, because that's when Bitcoin scaling solutions were a necessity, right? That's when base layer fees exploded. And I think that's also when you saw Bitcoiners were ready to degen a little bit, right? And so that obviously proved out that use case.
Yeah, I mean, from what you guys are saying, it's a spectrum, right? Like it's just not one group. It perhaps used to be one group or several groups with like somewhat shared ideologies, but that's just it's expanded so much that different products and if people really care, which is questionable, they can
Very
exist on separate environments based on their own research of the risks, right? But at the end of the day, I think different products would appeal to different people in the community, and you guys can kind of test who you want to appeal to and what works and kind of where the product market fit ends up being. So that's all the questions that I have. Thank you so much, guys. Let's give them a round of applause.